right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. This session is Dataverse Functions for Developers, a deep dive. So there will be some helpful information for all users, but it's intended to be a deep dive. It's intended to be technical. So just some level setting on what we'll have today. I'm Aiden Cuskella. I'm the President of Excellent Solutions and a 9-time Business Applications MVP, and working with the Power Platform and Dynamics 365 and CRM for the last 19 years. I'm a developer. I've been doing that my whole career. We do a lot of work with businesses of all sizes that need a little extra technical support. So if you, sorry? Okay. So we do a lot of work with businesses of all sizes. If you need a little extra technical assistance, please reach out or talk to me after, and I'd love to talk with you. I also organize the Washington, D.C. Power Platform User Group. We meet virtually every month, so you gotta make sure to check us out. So in this session, we're going to be talking about the evolution of invocable server-side logic. We're not talking about traditional plugins, things like when an opportunity is created, assign it to somebody based on their region. We're not really talking about that. This is code that you're going to explicitly invoke when you want to run it. So we're going to talk about that, the shared foundation between custom APIs and instant functions, real-world demos where you would use instant functions to get a quick server-side logic, key differences between the two, and then some kind of developers' tips, warnings, and best practices. So looking back in time, I guess back in 2013, Microsoft introduced custom actions. And these were really the original way to invoke code server-side. And when you create an action, you're able to define your own input and output parameters. And what made them so groundbreaking is when you create it, it creates a new message on the platform, just like a create or an update message. So, with your own custom actions, your own custom parameters, then you can write .NET code and register it against that message and invoke your .NET code from wherever you need to. So if you have a custom website and it's written in .NET or any language, right? Anything that can authenticate to Dataverse can invoke your custom code now. And eventually when Power Automate came around, then you could call it from Power Automate or JavaScript through the web API or PCF controls. And so this was really the first way to encapsulate a lot of your complex custom logic, managing it securely on the server, and being able to call it from anywhere that you need it. Custom APIs came along after that. They're kind of an evolution of those classic custom actions. They're really just a nicer, more modern interface over the old custom actions. Same features though. Still have your custom input and output parameters. It still creates a custom message on the back end for you to associate your code with, and you can call it from anywhere where you authenticate against Dataverse. So, same thing as actions, just a little more modern. And then the primary focus today is going to be on instant functions. So they're built on top of custom APIs. So you still get your input and output parameters. It still creates a custom message on the back end, but instead of having to associate your .NET code with that message, you can write PowerFX in the designer, and that's what's executed instead. And because it's written in PowerFX, it has some trickle-down effects, which we're going to talk about today. And just as a disclaimer, this isn't a session on PowerFX. I'm going to be talking about it in the context of kind of explaining some of the samples that we're building, but that's not the goal here. The goal is really to talk about instant functions, where we've used them, and how they stack up against custom APIs. So I'm going to get started, just going to get started with the demos now. So to start building your instant functions, you can go to Solutions, or you ought to go to Solutions, you don't have to. And I'm starting with a blank solution for this example. So nothing in here, go to New, that's Automation and Functions. So same area as your flows. So for this example, I'm going to do an instant function where we pass in contact ID and we get back some details about them. So sales info, their total spend, and the number of orders they've had. So pretty simple scenario. So let's call this, say, retrieve customer metrics. This will be contact ID. Our data types are all simple types. So it's not really type safe. Contact ID doesn't do it naturally, but we have to specify this as a string. And for our output parameters, we'll do number of orders as an integer, and total spend as decimal. The next section is for table references. So if you're pulling in values from any of your tables, you have to list them out here. So we're going to go with orders, and we'll include contact. So this is the first expression that we're going to use for this. It uses a with expression. So with is used for creating basically a small scope variable. So when you use the with expression, the top section is where you can kind of set up your variables and anything that you need to reference later. And then the final section in all of these statements, the final section needs to match up with your output parameters. That's basically how you define what you're returning to the caller. So in this case, we're going to filter our orders table where the contact ID matches the input parameter. We're going to save those results in this contact orders variable, and then assign our two output values as number of orders, which is the count of the rows, and then the total spend is summing the total amount. So, again, it's starting pretty simple. Paste that in. When we do the save from these, saving the expressions takes a moment, and then editing expressions takes a moment. When we save it, it does some stuff behind the scenes. So especially when you're creating a new one, it's a little slow. And we can see from our empty solution all the things that it did in the background. So we have the function which is created, retrieve customer metrics, creates an FX expression record. We'll take a look at that in a little more depth. But then what I think is really interesting is that it still just creates a custom API. It has a custom API request param and two response parameters. So if we want to test this now, we can come back to our main page on our maker. You have the functions is probably not on your left side already. You have to come to the discover section and pin it, so it shows up here. So you can make them here. You shouldn't. It's kind of like when flows came out. A lot of people were making them from the main area. You should always make them from a solution, but from here you can test it. And this is just kind of a simple way where we see the input parameters and then we get back our raw data. So I have a contact ID I'm going to test this on. Pass that in. Hit play. And we get our response. It's a little tough to see, but number of orders comes back as 2 and total spend is 29,000. So it just comes back as JSON values. what we expect, but a nice, quick, simple way to encapsulate some business logic. Now, what I think is really interesting is on the custom API. If we come in and take a look at this, again, I said this is kind of a wrapper for custom API. It is, it sets up our the names that we give it, has a global binding type by default, and there's a plugin type specified. So for, if you're writing a custom API on your own and you're writing .NET for it, there's two ways to invoke it. One is by picking your plugin type on the record. The other is through the plugin registration tool, and you can register it as either synchronous or async, right? So for the instant functions, Microsoft has elected to populate the plugin type on the record. So if you're feeling curious enough, you could open up the XRM toolbox, the assembly recovery tool, grab that assembly out, download it, look at it in the reflector, and actually see what's happening when you invoke it. So this is the Microsoft.PowerFX namespace, evaluator plugin. And we can see it just implements iPlugin, right? It's just a normal plugin that Microsoft wrote that does some special stuff, to interpret the expression. So we can come down and you can drill into the execute method and really get kind of line by line everything that it's doing. We're not going to get that detail. But this get compiled expression shows what it's, where it's getting the expressions from. So it's actually retrieving it from the FX expression table and looking at the compiled expression. So if we query on that table now, so this is the one that we just created, and I know it's a little small. I'll pull out the stuff that's interesting as we go through. But some of the columns that are on there, there's a context column, which has some info, talks about the tables that are being referenced. The dependencies, which I think is fantastic. It actually stores the dependencies on, these are references to the dependencies that your formula uses. So if you try to delete one of these custom fields, it'll tell you that there's a dependency here. So you won't be able to deploy it without those fields there. It's a really nice, nice touch. It does have the expression itself, and so this is just what we pasted in to the expression tool. And coming back to the beginning, we had our compiled expression. So this is what it actually retrieves. So this is actually just base 64 encoded. So we can decode that, no special tools, and take a look at what's going on here. So this is what it gets out of that FX expression table. It has the expression itself, so it doesn't actually read it from the expression column. It reads it from here. But it just has some more neat info. So this runs in the pre-operation stage. It talks about the tables that are being referenced and the parameters that are used for it. So not a whole lot that we're going to do, but kind of a neat look to see what's going on under the hood there. So with this expression, we already have a way to get back kind of that raw summary data for the customer. But let's apply some business logic to it and score the customer based on their sales history. So I'm going to create a new instant function that builds on this one a little bit. And we'll take a look at the expression that I want to build. So it's a little more complex. We have nested with statements. So to build upon our variables, you can't do something like this, it'd be nice. Can't do something like this where you're referencing a variable and then in the next line and the next line. You know, when you're referencing it, it kind of has to be in that next set of actions. So step one, we're going to call our instant function that we just created. We're going to pass in the contact ID and get back those, the total spend and number of orders, and save it in this variable. When we have that variable, we're going to score the customer based on that information. And this is a pretty simple formula that I just made up. So we're going to rate them based on how much they've spent and how many orders they've had. So for spending, we're going to max out at $50,000, and that's going to be weighted up to 80 points. For the number of orders, that's going to max at 10 orders, and that's going to be 20 points of their score. Come in and create another variable for the final score and round that out, and then return that. I'm going to set up our function to do this. That's going to be our contact ID, that's string. And we'll put our expression in here. Sorry, our customer score that we're returning is an integer. So that's good, that called that. Make sure everything looks good here. Okay, so this is a really neat error. Because the expression that we pasted in here is valid. It's perfectly fine, and I have other expressions or other functions using the same expression. I don't know why it does this. It takes some time, where if you kind of simplify some things and pull some values out, then it will work correctly. So I think it just needs a little time to come through. I'm not going to make you sit and wait for that to come through with me. So I have one that works already from my demo. So this one to retrieve the customer score. All right, same thing, contact ID, has the customer score, has the formula. And this is what I was talking about where it takes a while. This isn't internet speed, this is just slow. So this will bring our expression up. And we'll come back to the home page and test that. so called our backup function and got our customer score of 51. So I think this scenario really illustrates the benefits of using instant functions, and there's kind of two aspects of it that I think are key here. First, this is self-contained business logic written in PowerFX. So, if we've been live for a month and we're using this customer score and not really getting the results that we expect, right? We build this because we think we're going to get something out of it. We're going to have a number that tells us something about our customer. But if we go live and it's not really working that well, then we need to tweak it. So we might want to change the weighting of the scores, or what our ceiling is, or add a new factor entirely, right? We're able to do that now in PowerFX. We don't have to go back to the code to make any of these changes. The second thing that's really powerful about this is you can access the same logic from anywhere. So yes, we're writing some business logic in PowerFX, but you can call it from a flow when a new support case is created. And if they have a high customer score, you might want to mark it as a high priority issue. You can call it from a Canvas app. So if you're on site with customers and do some things, you can give some information. You can call it from JavaScript in your model-driven app. You can call it from a PCF control to get a real-time value. And all of these different places care about this number, but for different reasons and to do different things with it. So to illustrate that, in my model-driven app, we have refresh this, have a PCF control for our customer score. That calls that instant function that we just built, the backup version. Same thing, where it goes out and gets the number and displays it. So it doesn't know anything about that underlying business logic, and it doesn't need to, it doesn't care. All it needs to know is, given a number, what do I do with that? So that's what makes it, what I think makes it really important. And to just kind of show a quick sample of that is if we change our total spend ceiling to 20,000, we weight that lower, and we rate this metric higher. So we save that expression, pull our wheel again. And we get our updated customer score. So a really, really powerful way to do some interesting business logic. So I'm done with the demos. I'm going to switch back to slides and do some more topics. But before I do that, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So when deciding whether or not to use a plugin for this, really not a difference in performance in that.
All right, so the question was if you're, how plugins factor into it. I don't think it matters much as long as your code's written well. It is cached in that plugin. Like if you look at the IOSPI that we pulled up earlier, it caches the expression from that FX expression table. And it does run pretty quick. Yeah, sorry, another question over here? Yes?
Yeah, so would you say that this is better than just making a function column, because this is a more centralized place to call it now?
It's a great question. The question was, is this better than a function column? Was that right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's better. I think there are different use cases for them because this has parameters and this can reference multiple tables, which columns might be able to, but for this, it kind of depends more on what you're doing with as your input variables. And I didn't show it, but you can also update records and create records using these functions as well. Sorry, yes?
So, does this instant function, let's say, I have a customer here and I receive that, right? So if you don't use it for a while, it kind of goes to sleep, right? And next time you call it, it's no longer an extension, does it suffer from the same,
Yeah, great question. Question was, do the instant functions kind of go to sleep if they're not used, similar to how custom APIs do? They do, yeah. I've had the slot machine up on my phone. I've been hitting the button every couple of minutes because it goes to sleep after like 30 minutes, and then it takes 10 or 15 seconds to spin up.
I'm sure, have you found any techniques that without having to, like, some of the custom APIs that we have, they actually create them. I don't want to call them, so
Yeah, the question is, are there any tricks to keeping it alive? I mean, none really that I know of that don't involve just calling it, nonsensically, just to keep it spinning up. But you're welcome. There may be, but I don't know.
basically do a curl, just do it without, maybe you have to do it again instead of a
Yeah, yeah, yes.
If you have a long running function that's maybe 10 or 15 seconds of bidding on your records, and the user closes that page, will it keep running when on the server, or is it going to stop?
So the question was, if you have a long-running function, the user closes the page, what happens? And that is, the function will continue to run in the background. All of the instant functions are synchronous. And so you fire it, and it goes, it depends on how you invoke it, because your caller may not care. But on the server, it's running, it'll continue to run. It's not running in the browser. Right, yes, but in that. The question is if these are bound or unbound functions, is that right? Yes, these are all unbound. I'll get to that in one moment. Yes? I don't know the details on how robust the feature set is for the instant functions compared to columns. I've gotten the expressions pretty long, but I don't know what the practical limit is. Kind of in the examples that we're looking at, and I have another one kind of after this that builds on this a little bit, but it starts to get tough to read. And being able to call out to other instant functions and abstract chunks of your code out help with that. That makes it easier. But it's not. It can still get to be a bit much just to manage. Kind of like a super long flow. It's just hard to read after a while. So before I continue, any other questions now? Yes.
When using in the first we don't have maybe
No, I got this working and was good with it. Again, not really focused on the power effects for the purposes of this demo. Sorry, yes.
Good question. Yes, I had a trace in there. Is this being logged somewhere, or will you talk about it?
I will talk about that, yes. Okay, great. So I'm gonna continue on with some of the key differences between custom API and, sorry. There we go. So language, obviously that's a big big difference between the two, where you have PowerFX versus traditional, .NET code. As far as knowledge, instant functions can only access Dataverse data, right? They're only going to be able to access the tables that you have, whereas with custom APIs, you're able to call out to the web, right? You can do anything you want basically with a custom API. The tables referenced, there is a limit of 5 per function. So back in our builder, where you pick those tables, you're only allowed to pick 5. However, you can call child functions, and those tables don't count against your limit. So you could have, query against 5 for this one, query against 5 more on another child function, and kind of combine all those results and use them. But again, it gets a little tough to manage once you start spreading out your logic that way. Invoking other actions, right? Instant functions, you can do that. I showed that in our example. So you can call out to other instant functions. Custom APIs can invoke instant functions as well as other custom APIs and everything else, right? There's really no limits when you're working in the custom API. But I think there's an important call out here. Because instant functions can't invoke classic custom APIs, there's not a gateway to get from low code to pro code. So you end up with a scenario here where you have a cliff, where you're building a low code instant function, and it can get really complex and do a bunch of stuff, but all of a sudden you need code for something, for some tiny part of it that you can't do in PowerFX. And there's no way to get that running in pro code, right? You can't bridge that gap. So you either need to change your requirement, or then you need to go back to rewrite it as a custom API. Yes? That's a great question, and I will have some examples in a moment. Yes? Executing as, so I think this is the biggest important difference to keep in mind on the two. Instant functions always run as the current user. So I'm executing this function, and I run it as Aiden, and I can only do what I'm allowed to do based on my security rule. So if it's trying to access some secret table, and I don't have access to that, then my function won't work. So that's great. And on the surface, that seems like the more secure option, but I take a different view of things. If we think about this customer score example that we've been using, with that, we have to query the order table. So everyone who needs to look at that score needs full access to the orders, or they'll only see the score, based on the orders that they're able to see. And that might be fine. It's orders, who cares, right? Everybody should be able to see that. But there may be other data that we're factoring that on. So let's say we have education history, or we have their credit score, or other kinds of sensitive information that we don't want to open up to everybody. For things like that, our two options are give everybody access to all that underlying data, which is very not secure, or that's where we'd have to use a custom API. So with a custom API, you can call in and pass those same parameters, except you're able to use an elevated user to query for the records or perform whatever actions it needs to, and then just return the calculation. You can return that end result to the caller, and there's a gap then between what they're asking for, the underlying data, and the composite result based on that. So it was a little bit of an abstract scenario there, but let's think about a call center, right? On my contact form, I have showing this on a different demo, so this works out well. I have the birthday and the last 4 of their social. So in my call center, somebody calls up and they say, I need you to find my account. My last name is Cascella. My birthday is January 1st, 1980, and these are my last 4 of my social. If we want to use instant functions to match up a contact, that means all of our call center users need the entire list of everybody's date of birth and last four of social and their last name, along with all the other data you have for them. A more secure way to do this would be a custom API. You put a field security profile on these columns, and we query for it with an elevated user. So they pass in the 3 values they're given, and the result is either yes, there's a match, or no, there's not. Or if there's a match, it's this record, and it pops it open for them. So that executing user, I think, is a really, really critical differentiator, and where you still want to use custom APIs to keep things more secure from our users. But I thought I saw a hand go up in this direction. Yes?
Sorry, I was just going to ask a different, by executing user, do you mean the user who created the function, or the user who's executing the function like in the screen?
Thank you. To clarify, by executing user, I mean the person who is calling the function. Yes, and with custom APIs, by default, you're going to run things as the person who invoked it. However, you have the option to use that elevated user as well. Is there another hand over here? Okay. So binding, unbound and bound binding on custom APIs and instant functions. Instant functions are always unbound. Custom APIs can be your choice. What this means is, if we have something like, actually I think our customer score example is a good scenario here. We're always running that on a contact record. It's based on a contact. Logically, it should always run for one contact. And with a custom API, we can make that a bound thing. We can bind it to the contact table, and it won't run unless you specify a contact. They're only unbound for instant functions, so we have to make that contact ID an input parameter. So it's kind of a technical thing. It's a little less nice, not a huge difference maker, but just something to keep in mind. For tracing, custom APIs, obviously, yes, you can use tracing. Instant functions, you can, but it may impact your structure. So we'll take a look at how tracing works. And if we look at our expression, so this is the one that we just built for the slot machine, right? We tweaked that a little bit. But inside our power effects, we can add these trace statements. And it's a little finicky. You can't put them, so if you're using a web, you can't put them up where you're working with your variables. It doesn't like that. You can't put it down here where you're returning your object. It doesn't like that. But they can live kind of in between. Where you're performing multiple operations, you can put your trace statements there. So in this case, I have the, kind of logging all of the steps as I go through. So defining our customer metrics and logging that, our points calculated, and then our final score. So with this trace, if we look at the trace viewer, you can see these are just regular old expressions, just like you have custom APIs that you're calling. So we can look at our, this is our top level expression that we're calling in directly. I'll zoom in a little bit. See, kind of our message, that it starts, and that's the regular plugin tracing, but then it has our custom messages below. And so that's where we can see any of our details that we need to troubleshoot as we go through. It is kind of cool that you still get the depth, you still get to see those child functions that we're invoking as well. So this is our depth 2 one to actually retrieve those orders and total spend. Timing, I think we talked about this a moment ago. The instant functions are always synchronous. They run at transaction, whereas custom APIs can be synchronous or async. And where that makes a difference is, we said that instant functions can update records or create records. And since they're running in a transaction, if one of them fails and throws an exception, then the entire transaction will roll back. So you don't end up with some of your records created and some not. And typically that's good. Usually that's what you'd want. Not always though. There are some things where you may need to log kind of every step, and if something breaks, that's fine. So you know, think about like credit card processing, right? You want to know everything that happened. You don't necessarily want to wipe out that data. And then customization dependencies, we talked about that a little bit. Instant functions do create them, so if you go look at those fields that are being referenced in the expression, it shows that they're being used there, or you know, which expression's using it, so that's a really, really good thing. And custom APIs, since that's all code-based, you just don't have that. And then some more developer notes. These are kind of things that are interesting for the builds. You know, for pro devs, I think that might be mildly interesting, or things that I found at least. The build environment is limited and errors can be unhelpful. So while I was building them, some things just blew up, even though the expressions were valid. And you can kind of see some of those expressions here, or some of those issues here. Yeah, this is the one I tried to create. It didn't like the expression for some reason, even though it's a valid expression. So not a very helpful editor, and not a lot of white space to work with. So it's a little challenging there. You know, with traditional plugins, you can throw an exception and force everything to roll back if you're not happy with something, or somebody's lacking security permissions, or 100 other reasons that you might want to throw an exception. And you can't really do that with instant functions. If you wanted to handle that type of thing, you know, you probably want like your output parameter to have an error message property, or like is valid property, or was successful, and set that as part of your return. But there's not a way to really force it to, you know, bail on the transaction itself. You can only have simple input types, right? You can't have an entity reference, or you know, money, or things like that. Just simple value types, like, you know, decimal, integer, string. So it's not type safe, and that can be challenging. You know, even in the first example that we used, this contact ID that was coming in as a parameter was a string, and it would complain because it's trying to match up the primary key against a string when it needs to be cast as a GUID first. So, you know, just little things like that, and you know, and even then, we're hoping that somebody passes in a GUID and not, you know, anything else for that. The next one I think is really cool. I haven't really found a good use for this yet, but you can still register asynchronous plugins against that custom message that gets created. So in the custom API that gets generated, it has the option for, you know, do you want to show this when it comes up? So allow custom processing step, it's marked as async only, which means you can go to the plugin registration tool, find your, you know, register a custom plugin against this message. So then anytime somebody invokes it, it does the PowerFX expression in the pre-operation and returns the result. But in the meantime, your async code spins off on the side. So I guess one example where this, you know, where you could do this is like if you want to log, you know, maybe have a sensitive expression or something, like you could log every time it gets invoked. You could say, you know, who created it, when. Something kind of neat, you know, not super helpful, but kind of neat though. For instant functions, there is a max depth. It's hard-coded as 7. You can see that in the plugin. You can still invoke permissions on the custom API, or apply custom permissions. So this is something that you can use on custom APIs, but you can actually also use it on the instant functions. I'm not sure what happens if you do, besides it probably not working. Actually, I haven't tested it, but I'm pretty confident that this will prevent a user from being able to invoke it, even if they otherwise have access to that underlying data. And then, just with any other low-code tool, really, you lose the strengths that come with pro code. So, you don't have a repo, you don't have unit tests, things like that. You can't do code reviews. All the stuff that pro devs like, you lose that. Who made the change, why, what work item is associated with. Hopefully you are backing up your solution to source control, and you have a good, healthy pipeline taking care of that. So at least you know when things change. But, you don't get a lot of those other benefits. But that's kind of one of the general trade-offs when we're working with low-code technologies. So that was everything I wanted to show and talk about. But we've got about 13 minutes left for questions. So I'll stay and answer questions, but please make sure to go in the Hoover app and fill out your surveys. They're very helpful for organizers, and I appreciate it. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So when you talk about source control, does that show like
So the question was, how does this look in source control? And I haven't exported this as a solution, but looking at so there is an object for the FX expression, like there's a new object type in the solution. And looking at that, here it does have the expression listed. So when you export your solution, if you unpack it in source control, you should see that expression in plain text there. Yeah. You're welcome. Okay, other questions? Yes. I'm sorry, I was having a hard time hearing. Can you say again, please? So earlier the problem I was having is it's a valid expression that it wasn't recognizing as valid. And sometimes what I've had to do is create it with a simple expression, like something simple, and then come in and edit it, add more to it, and repeat until I build it up all the way. The formula columns do the same thing. Yeah, hopefully it will be improving soon, but yeah, it's a little finicky at times. Yes. Yes. Yeah, the question is if you're able to do creates and updates of records. Yes, absolutely. So you could have things like, I don't know, pass in details about the order, and the expression actually takes the simple input values, creates an order record with details, creates products or adds products to it, that kind of thing. But yeah, absolutely, you can create and update records. Thank you. Yes. I'm sorry, can you say that again? Yeah, so the question is, can you create a parent record and child records? Yes, you can. And that's using a with expression. Kind of in the top part, you would create your variable, which is that parent record, and then reference that variable inside the with to kind of loop over and create your child records and reference that parent variable. Yes, yeah, command bar, do the same thing there. Yeah, for cloning records, yeah. You're welcome. Yes.
Is there like any sort of like diminishing return that you run into when you're kind of invoking other functions from other functions as like that depth increase, or like if you have one function that invokes like 3 or 4 other functions, is there any sort of time where you say, I've got too many functions involved here, or?
So by diminishing returns, do you mean for the management aspect?
No, more on the speed side of things.
I haven't got, so.
Because on the
sorry.
management, you're just making it more complex to manage, so that's
Right.
kind of, I guess, self-explanatory. But like, yeah, as far as the execution times of those functions, do you see any like loss of speed as you include more functions?
Yeah, so the question was if I've noticed loss of speed as get more complex with child functions. I haven't really. However, I haven't done things that are that complex, and I would expect some degradation there.
Or anything where like, you know, you've got some sort of chain of functions calling each other, you update one of them, is there any sort of caching scenario where one function is caching an older version of the expression of one of those other functions? Are there any things that you need to work out or look out for there?
I haven't seen any issues with function caching affecting calling functions.
Yeah.
And when we did it with the slot machine scenario,
You updated the parent function there, not the child.
well, I updated the parent function, but the parent function just invokes the child.
Right.
And so just like the slot machine invokes the parent. So I don't think that the entire body of the whole tree of logic gets cached in the parent.
Right.
So I think updating that child would be independent of the parent, and I think that would reflect immediately. I haven't tested it,
Okay.
but that would be my expectation. But great question, thank you. Or is there another question here? Sorry. Yes.
I believe you already answered it, but all of that runs on the server. All of that logic does. So if we did have something that was business critical that we were worried that the user would close out of the browser and say Canvas app, we could have this run separately.
Yes, all of this runs in the server. It's all initiated immediately and will continue on in the server regardless of what the user does. If it's that critical, I'm not sure if I would use an instant function for it, but yes, that's how it would behave.
Okay.
Yes.
So can I ask a question about what custom APIs?
Yes. Yeah, I love custom APIs. Fire away.
So, we do AI. So ideally, we like, we use real time. So ideally, what I'm trying to do is like, do sales functions, to go solutions and package. But then I'm having a hard time, package, like, and we still use the solution store. Solution package. And I have tried to maximize as well. But whenever I have a package, then we have to really package. And also, I have some plugins that I want using it. It seems like it doesn't like everything.
We're doing a session tomorrow for I forget what it's called. It's at in the afternoon tomorrow. I'm doing a session there, and then my co-presenter knows everything about that, be able to help with that specifically. Yeah. Yes, I'm one of the speakers there. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't know the answer. I would tell you now. I'm not being coy about it. I don't know. Sorry. Yes. Great question. Yes, you can invoke these from Power Automate. Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome. Yes. So the question was, is there best practice around permissions when you deploy these functions? The way that those permissions work is it's a little funky. You have to tell it, like, if you look at the tables, at the specific like table level permissions, it's like priv, read, contact, like that kind. That's what you have to put in the text box. So, and when you deploy that out, that's going to be in the environment based on the security roles being deployed as well. So I don't know if there's any best practice. I think it's a less than ideal solution. So I don't know if there's any real best practices. I mean, you're just kind of tying it to some other privilege that exists in the system already. Okay. Sorry. Yep.
I may have missed it. Was there a way to make any of the parameters optional
The question is, can you make the parameters optional?
on input or output?
I think for output, I think you have to specify them. I think you get an error if you don't. Let's take a look at the input.
Because you were talking about like the error handling thing. I was, like a optional output parameter could help with that, I guess.
Well, I know with custom APIs, you have to, even if you're setting, like if you have a string output parameter, you have to set that to an empty string.
Right.
So I actually haven't tested that with the instant functions, but I believe I got errors, like only setting some of the values that I return.
Right.
So, so if you had like an error message, you'd want to set that to a blank value.
Yeah, because I was thinking for the scenario of like they pass a GUID for a contact ID and there's no contact there, right? Right now, in that instant function, there's no way to give them a good error for that, right? Or
Right.
You're just hoping that the error that you get on that filter is useful.
Yes. Yeah, I think if they passed in like an ID that didn't exist, right, then yeah, maybe you're returning, your return value includes an error message and it is valid, or things like that that you
Right.
set. All right, sorry, there's the yes. Yeah, so the durations here are the time that it takes to call that expression. So I believe, so these two are tied, right? This is the parent and this is the child. So I think this 427 is inclusive of this 171. But yeah, the total time to call this function was that time. Yeah.
Using traits that kind of doesn't really take up a lot of resources. Say for example,
Mhm. So the question is if you would still put the trace out in other environments. And yeah, so I think it's fine to include it because you can turn off tracing on the environment. And so just like if you have tracing on in your plugins, you're going to have those messages there. You may not be collecting it, kind of depending on the trace lock settings. So yeah, so I think I would keep them in and then just turn off tracing if you don't need it, or keep it at like exception only. Sorry, yeah, that's it. I have one more thing that I meant to add. So any other questions? Sorry, jumping back. Yes.
Is there any limitation in terms of size of the function?
I'm sorry, I'm having a tough time here.
Is there any limit in the size of the function?
Is there a limit on the size of the function? I mean, I don't know. There's some limit. I don't know if there's a practical limit or if it just gets too difficult to manage after a while. I haven't hit the limit on that size yet, but I'm sure there is one.
Is there a limitation in terms of OFX function you can use?
Sorry, please go ahead.
Is there any limitation in terms of OFX function you can use or you cannot use some function?
Oh, sorry, the functions from PowerFX. There are some limitations. So I think things like collect that do variables for like data sets you can't use. So that's why I was using with in the expressions. I'm not a PowerFX expert. I'm much more familiar with custom APIs and starting to use instant functions to replace them. So I can't really speak to the PowerFXs strongly, but there are some limitations that are documented. Yeah.
And you said also about transaction.
Mhm.
How does it work? You can manage a transaction or is it automatic?
The transaction is automatic. So everything that's happening within when the expression executes, everything that happens in there, it's a lot like, I don't know, if you put in a bad value for a contact and it blows up when you hit save. It just undoes everything on its own. That works the same way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
So how would you typically trigger these functions?
So the question is, how would you typically trigger these functions? And I think that depends on what you are looking to do with them. So, in the examples that I had today, it was get an arbitrary score for a person. So it could be routing support cases. It could be, could be routing support cases. It could be, let's say you had a canvas at the front desk for check-in, and you want to give the person bonus points or whatever, when they register.
But what if I have a model-driven app?
You can
Yes.
do a button, you can do a PCF
You
control.
have model-driven app.
Yeah. Yeah, like with a command button or something like that.
Yeah, so you can invoke these from a command button. Click a button, do something. You can have JavaScript running on the form that calls the web API and invokes the custom action.
Okay.
You can have a PCF control that calls it. That's what the little slot machine is. Since you're working in a model-driven app, then you have your code running in Dataverse. So you could have a plugin invoke this function, get the value back, and do something with it. You could have Power Automate do something from